12-year-old Kimberly Norwood left a friend's house late on the afternoon of May 20th, 1989, and started the mile-long walk to her home in the small town of Hallsville, Texas. This wasn't uncommon. Kids walked everywhere in those days. But on this day, Kimberly never made it home. It's been 36 years, and her family is still looking for answers.
Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In the last 50 years, the U.S. has had nearly 1 million homicides, and since then, over 250,000 cases sit in a box in a basement where all hopes for justice go to die. In 1996, someone shot my uncle Leon Laurelis, changing my life forever and leaving a devastating hole in my heart, and his case remains unsolved. Join me and my wife, Leah, as we shed light on these forgotten victims, their life, the loved ones they left behind, the evidence, and the theories of who committed these crimes, leaving communities in fear and leaving families without answers. Support our effort to change the justice system through the Homicide Families Victims' Rights Act, as we hope to make a difference with our audience as we remember the victims and demand justice. In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laurelis was shot execution-style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and co-workers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention, in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcast and Justice for Leon Laurelis. And now you can also find us on YouTube.
Today we're going back to 1989. I feel like we've done a lot of cases from 1989. It was a crazy, turbulent year on so many levels. So we've discussed this before, but violent crime in the U.S. rose steadily throughout the 1960s and 70s and peaked in 1981. It dropped over the next 5 years and then climbed again, peaking in 1991, and has been steadily declining ever since. So 1989 was right in the middle of that second wave. There are a lot of reasons violent crime ticked up during that time. The crack epidemic led to violence, and the war on drugs led to a boom in prison populations and the number of convicted felons running around who couldn't get actual jobs. People were moving out of urban areas, meaning the number of jobs in those areas decreased, further exacerbating income inequality. The world itself was unstable politically. You had revolutions sweeping through Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union was crumbling, and massive protests and government crackdowns in China. The U.S. also invaded Panama at that time. It was a crazy year. Kim Norwood's family lived in Hallsville, Texas, which is a small town in the far eastern part of the state, about halfway between a lot of places you've probably never heard of if you're not from Texas. It's about 140 miles east of Dallas and 50 miles west of Shreveport, Louisiana, in Harrison County. Yes, there is a railroad involved in Hallsville's history, but the town actually grew up around Fort Crawford, which was built in 1839 to defend a tract of land from indigenous people living in the area. The Southern Pacific Railway came to town and the population grew. A post office opened, and saloons and shops popped up, followed by sawmills and grist mills. The population of Hallsville today numbers just under 5,000 residents, many of whom commute to nearby Tyler or Marshall for work or are employed locally in retail or healthcare. In 1989, Hallsville would have had around 2,200 people, and the town would have been less developed. Most of the articles and interviews I've read on this case indicate that Hallsville had some densely wooded sections that were difficult to navigate, and that will come into play later in our story. Kimberly Rachelle Norwood, known as Kim to her friends and family, was born on October 12, 1976 in Hallsville, Texas, to parents Janice and Bobby. In May of 1989, she was just finishing up the school year and would have entered Hallsville Junior High that fall. She was a straight-A student with lots of friends who loved horseback riding and hanging out with her younger sister Pamela. She was in the band, and her family said that's what she was most looking forward to about junior high. She loved the holidays, especially Thanksgiving, and she was very social and liked to joke around and laugh. Like many tween girls, Kim was starting to get interested in clothes and how she looked, and her family recalls that she would spend a half hour getting her hair just right before leaving the house every morning before school. At the time of her disappearance, Kim and her family had been living in the Caney Creek subdivision in Hallsville. It was a heavily wooded area with roads that were full of twists and turns. This will become more important as our story progresses. Kim had a lot of friends and was very socially active. She had spent the night of Friday, May 19th at a friend's house and returned home on the morning of May 20th to drop off her clothes and check in with her mother. She and her sister Pam walked to another property in the subdivision to go horseback riding, something they did regularly. Kim had a horse named Redbird that she loved dearly. While they were riding, a group of Kim's friends stopped by and asked if she wanted to hang out. Kim agreed and left with the other girls. I'm assuming Pam walked back home at this point. There's no mention of her leaving with the group of girls, and later on in the story, Kim would head home alone. Later that same afternoon, Kim called home and asked her mother if she could spend the night with a friend. Kim's mother said no and reminded her that she had chores to tend to at home. Kim was generally a responsible kid, and it was always a struggle to get her to clean her room. Her mother insisted she come home to take care of that and tend to her cat. I think most of us who are human beings would attest to the fact that it was difficult for us to clean up our rooms as kids. Kim argued with her mom for a few minutes before giving in and then eventually agreed to come home. Kim and her friends headed toward Kim's house at around 5 p.m. It was about a mile from point A to point B, and Kim's group of friends split off at about the halfway point at around 5:15 p.m. Kim and her friends regularly walked around the neighborhood without any hesitation. As we said earlier, it was tucked in a patch of trees and off the beaten path. It wasn't really a place you'd end up by accident. You would typically need a reason to show up in that subdivision. Kim's family would later recall that any time they had visitors, they'd inevitably get lost on the complicated network of twisty roads in the area trying to find the Norwood home. Kim's friends recalled seeing her cross the bridge over Caney Creek on Highway 449, and that's the last time anyone saw her alive. She should have made it home by 5:30 p.m., but when she failed to show up, Kim's mom assumed that she was being a stubborn preteen. She called the parents of the friend she'd been visiting and learned that Kim had left an hour beforehand. Kim's mother Janice and her father Bobby gave it a little more time and then drove around the neighborhood looking for her. After searching for a few hours with no answers, they reported her missing to the police. Harrison County Sheriff's deputies launched a search of the subdivision, but didn't find anything that might indicate foul play. Kim's friends told deputies about her spat with her mother Janice over cleaning her room, and they immediately assumed she had run away. Kim's family and friends insisted that she would never do that, especially not over something so stupid and petty, but law enforcement was convinced she'd left on her own. Look, as a grandparent to two 12-year-olds, I cannot express how absurd I find this. 12-year-olds are stubborn as hell. Yes, 12-year-olds don't like to clean their rooms because they're 12 and they have better things to do. Kids at that age are interested in hair and makeup and video games and sports, not chores. Kim had left all of her belongings at home. Her purse with the pocket money she did have was in her room. She hadn't taken any clothing or any personal effects with her if she had run away. The sheriff's department and a group of volunteers continued to search the area around the Norwood home throughout the weekend. Like we said earlier, this was a heavily wooded area at the time, so they were using ATVs, search dogs, and horses to cover the areas not easily accessible by car or on foot. By Sunday, May 21st, the sheriff's department suspended the search, theorizing that if Kim was still in the local area, they would have found some sign of her by now. So at this point, Kim was still classified as a runaway, so law enforcement kind of sat on their hands. Searches that took place after that first weekend were conducted mostly by Kim's friends, neighbors, and family members. They also canvassed the subdivision, asking friends and neighbors if they'd seen any sign of Kim. None had. Within a week, Kim's parents had put up missing posters all over their small town, but nobody ever called them with any information. 2 weeks into Kim's disappearance, the sheriff's department was still operating under the assumption that she'd run away on her own, so they weren't actively following any leads. And Kim's parents were skeptical about their claims that they were taking tips seriously at that point. Investigators found some notes in Kim's school locker that indicated she was frustrated at home and that she wanted to run away or kill herself. And that is concerning. But was she serious? Had she been having actual problems at home or real mental health issues? Or was this just a frustrated 12-year-old venting? Her family doesn't seem to think it was all that serious, but you never know what's going through someone else's head. Though Kim was perfectly comfortable walking around the neighborhood alone or with her friends during the day, she hated being out at night. She was also terrified of snakes, and any time she wandered into the wooded areas around the neighborhood, she would take her BB gun. There was no question in Janice and Bobby Norwood's mind. Their daughter hadn't been abducted. She wouldn't be out wandering alone in the dark, in the woods, without her BB gun. And this pisses me off, because even if she had initially run away for whatever reason, it's now been 2 weeks. A 12-year-old in a small town isn't going to stay away for 2 weeks, unless something has happened to her. Either she fell and injured herself, or she was a victim of foul play. For law enforcement to be stuck on the runaway narrative 2 weeks after the fact is bullshit. And Kim's parents were really frustrated with this too. They took issue with the sheriff's department's handling of this case almost from day one. And when they felt like they kept hitting a brick wall, they hired a private investigator and fronted a large monetary reward for information. The family also organized a rally outside of the Harrison County Courthouse to try and pressure anyone, to take more action on this case. I read an interview with the sheriff from the time, and he was really defensive about his department's handling of the case, insisting that he was being badgered by, quote-unquote, a few radical people. About a month after Kim went missing, her parents, Bobby and Janice, were asked to take a polygraph. They did, and they passed, but this didn't stop police from looking at Bobby Norwood as a person of interest when they did get around to accepting the idea that this was a matter of foul play. I don't know the specifics of why Bobby was on the investigators' radar. Since this is an open case, I don't have access to every piece of information I want, but, we always look at the family first. In any case, early in the investigation, it was abundantly clear that the sheriff's department seemed to be out to get Bobby Norwood, but they eventually ruled him out. Witnesses reported seeing a motorcycle leaving the neighborhood the day Kim went missing with a passenger on the back who fit her description, but nothing ever came of that. A sheriff's deputy had also noticed a car with Colorado plates hanging around the neighborhood the same day, but again, no further leads. Time passed, and several possible sightings were reported to law enforcement from the area near Lake of the Pines, which is about a 30 to 45-minute drive from Hallsville, depending on the road taken. Police searched a home in Gregg County, which is the next county over from Harrison County, after a report came in that Kim was being held captive there. But again, none of these leads or tips panned out. The summer of 1989 wore on, and in August, law enforcement conducted another large-scale search in the Caney Creek subdivision using cadaver dogs and thermal imaging, but they turned up nothing. At this point in time, investigators concluded that Kim was no longer in the area. Took them, 3 months to determine that a missing 12-year-old was no longer in the area? I have so many questions. Bobby and Janice Norwood appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show in August of 1989 as well, hoping to get their story out to a much wider audience and get some new leads. The appearance led to a few phone calls and tips, but none of those generated any good leads. So what happened to Kim Norwood on the afternoon of May 20th, 1989 in Hallsville, Texas? In my mind, we have 3 main options here. She ran away and later met with foul play. She was abducted by someone who knew her or knew of her, or this was a stranger abduction. We'll start with the runaway theory, since that was what law enforcement initially believed. I don't really buy this theory. Yes, Kim had written some letters that were found in her locker that indicated she was unhappy and wanted to run away. The question here is, how seriously do we take those letters? And by we, I mean American society in general, tend to write off kids as being dramatic and unreasonable creatures who don't have the first clue what they really want. I find myself getting sucked into that mindset as well. At the same time, I look back on some of the things I felt and experienced at that age and realized I really wasn't being all that dramatic, and I actually did understand what I wanted and needed. And like I mentioned earlier, I have 2 12-year-old grandkids. They are incredibly smart and self-aware, and I think we're just too quick to dismiss kids' feelings and experiences sometimes. That being said, I have no idea what was actually going through Kim's mind at this time. As smart and self-aware as I believe 12-year-olds can be, they certainly are also dramatic. According to her family, Kim wasn't having any serious issues at home. It was mostly typical preteen stuff. She was upset that her mom was being hard on her. Her mom was frustrated because she couldn't get Kim to keep up with some of her chores and responsibilities. If Kim was having a mental health crisis or some serious family problems, there's no real indication of that. But again, this was 1989, and mental health issues for adults in the general public were still kind of taboo. Forget addressing kids' mental health issues. We know that Kim and her mom were bickering a little right before she went missing, but nothing strikes me as too odd about this. Kim called home and asked if she could spend the night at a friend's house, and her mom said no. She needed to come home and clean her room and take care of her cat. So she left, and she walked towards her home. I'm betting a lot of parents out there can relate stories about how their kids, quote unquote, ran away at some point. And then they walk half a block and they come back home pouting. I think I did the same thing when I was a kid. I think I put some random shit in my teddy bear suitcase and walked to the end of the block. And then realized I was way out of my depth and went back home. So is it possible that that might be the case here? Kim got upset and maybe walked off like that? I suppose. But again, she had nothing with her, and she's 12. Where's she going to go? I also lived near a heavily wooded area as a kid. I think I stomped off into the woods and sat down on a tree stump and pouted once, but then it started to get dark and I had to pee and it got cold and I went back home. So I think it's possible that may be the case here. Maybe she stomped off into the woods to pout and then got lost or injured. Or maybe she met with foul play. Regardless of whether or not Kim ran away, I believe she met up with a bad actor. First option here is that Kim was abducted by a stranger. We've talked about how rare stranger abductions are in previous episodes, which automatically makes me skeptical that this was the case, but it does happen. If this was a stranger abduction, it was either someone going to this neighborhood specifically looking for kids to pick up, or it was a crime of opportunity. Maybe someone saw Kim sitting or walking somewhere looking upset and asked if she wanted a ride. Investigators in the family don't think this is the case, and I tend to agree with them. The Norwoods lived off the beaten path. Their neighborhood wasn't a place you just happened to drive through on your way to somewhere else. Like we said earlier, people would get lost trying to find the neighborhood even with directions. So the chances of this being a stranger abduction are slim, in my opinion. So then the other possibility here is that she was taken by someone she knew, or someone who lived in the neighborhood and knew of her. Maybe someone was waiting for her. Maybe someone from the neighborhood saw her walking home and offered her a ride. In any case, law enforcement doesn't have any suspects or persons of interest that they've made public. They've found no real physical evidence, and there are very few witnesses. This is still technically a missing persons case, so we'll give you the rundown here. Kimberly Rachelle Norwood was 12 years old when she went missing on May 20th, 1989, which means she'd be 48 years old today. At the time, she was 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighed 95 pounds. She had long brown hair, brown eyes, and a 2-inch surgical scar on her abdomen. She has pierced ears and uses her right hand. The day she went missing, she was wearing a white t-shirt with cows and the words "Milk Dudes" on it. Black or dark blue jeans, white socks, black kid sneakers, a black hair bow, a Swatch watch, and other jewelry, including a gold ring with an aquamarine stone. If you have any information regarding her disappearance, please contact the Harrison County Sheriff's Office at 903-935-4888.
Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you or someone you know is a victim of crime, support is available. Call 855-4-VICTIM to speak with someone who can help you understand your rights and options. Visit victimconnect.org to learn more. We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network. Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. Check out all the great shows at darkcastnetwork.com.
On Wiki Travel, the Pacific Northwest is best known for its beautiful coastline, green interior, rainy weather, and spectacular mountains. But because of all this, it's also the perfect place to go missing. My name's Carmita, and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon. I host a podcast called Missing in the PNW. My podcast is different from others you may have heard because I focus specifically on two things. The first is that all of the missing person cases that I cover are strictly from the Pacific Northwest and Oregon and Washington. I know, the title of my podcast should have given that one away. The second thing is that my podcast focuses strictly on missing persons from marginalized communities, such as the Black, Hispanic, Native American and Indigenous people, and the LGBTQ plus communities. You know, the ones that get absolutely no media attention. Now, I am not an investigative journalist or a reporter. I'm actually a widowed mom of 3 who loves true crime and has a passion for social justice. So join me in helping to spread the word on these missing person cases and help be the voice for the ones that are now voiceless. You can find Missing in the PNW on all of the major streaming apps, as well as on socials at Missing in the PNW Podcast. If you have a case you want me to cover, please email me at missinginthepnw@gmail.com or send me a message through Facebook Messenger. I hope to talk to you soon. And remember, have fun, but be safe.
If you think bringing unsolved cases is important, then please take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Also, please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcasts and Justice for Leon Laurelis. You can now also find us on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe. It would help so much, my lovelies. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. This podcast has a bigger purpose than just providing information and entertainment. The Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act is a bipartisan bill that was signed into law by Congress in 2021, and we want to see it put into action. This law establishes a systematic process for reviewing case files related to cold case murders. The focus is on providing a mechanism for the families and friends of murder victims to request a formal review of such cases. I also have a GoFundMe page to hire an attorney to help me get a copy of his autopsy that I have been denied for 27 years. You can find the GoFundMe by searching for Leon Laurelis. That's Laureles. But to get his body exhumed, to search for evidence that was not collected the first time around. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.